Look at the screen, everyone. Charles Albright's voice boomed through the high-end audio system of the glass boardroom, echoing off the polished mahogany table. I adjusted my posture, keeping my face completely neutral despite the quiet anticipation building in my chest. It was the annual shareholder review at Albright Logistics, a multi-million-dollar maritime freight enterprise. For 9 long years, I had poured my entire life into this company as the Senior Director of Global Supply Infrastructure. My name is Edward Foster. At 55 years old, today was supposed to be the culmination of every late night, every skipped weekend, and every broken promise made to my family. The next slide was the announcement for the new Senior Vice President of Operations. Everyone in the room knew the role was mine. My performance metrics were flawless, my team's efficiency was at an all-time high, and my loyalty was unquestioned. But as the projector clicked, the name that flashed in bold letters on the screen was not Edward Foster. It read Julian Albright. The room went completely ice-cold. A suffocating silence fell over the executives and shareholders. Charles smiled warmly, gesturing toward the back of the room, where his 24-year-old son, Julian, stood up in an expensive designer suit and waved casually. Julian was a recent sports marketing graduate who did not know the difference between a shipping container and a bulk carrier. He was being handed the keys to the entire global infrastructure that I had spent nearly a decade building from scratch. I did not gasp and I did not break composure. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting flat on the mahogany table, absorbing the collective pitying glances of the board members. They knew exactly who actually ran the operations. When the meeting adjourned, I did not cause a scene on the operations floor. I waited until the boardroom cleared, then followed Charles straight into his private corner office. He was pouring a glass of expensive scotch, looking remarkably pleased with himself. As the heavy office door clicked shut, he turned around, noticing the absolute unreadable calm on my face. He sighed, adjusting his silver tie, his expression shifting from celebratory to deeply patronizing. "Edward, please do not look at me like that," he said, walking over to his desk and leaning against the edge. "Let us be realistic here. You are the invisible engine that runs this business, and I appreciate that. But Julian is the face of this brand. Engines belong under the hood, where no one sees them. Your job now is to train him, manage his daily workload, and ensure he looks flawless to the board of directors. It is what is best for the family legacy." The sheer cruelty of his words hung in the air. Engines belong under the hood. Charles genuinely believed I would accept being permanently buried in the shadows, doing double the work for a fraction of the executive pay, just to keep his unqualified son afloat. Before I could even formulate a response, the office door swung open. Julian sauntered in, tapping furiously on his phone. Without even making eye contact with me, he dropped a thick stack of papers directly onto my lap. "Edward, right?" he asked, his voice dripping with casual entitlement. "Here are all the catering and catering equipment invoices from the presentation this morning. Make sure these are processed and paid by the end of the day. Administrative coordination seems much more your speed anyway. And I need to clear my plate for the executive lunch." I looked down at the invoices, then looked up at Charles. He did not blink. He just offered a slight, encouraging nod, silently telling me to obey his son. In that exact microsecond, the final remaining threads of my institutional loyalty snapped. A strange, powerful clarity washed over me. Charles had mistaken my quiet competence for permanent servitude. He thought I was trapped by my dedication to the company. They had absolutely no idea what they had just triggered. I looked at Julian, smiled serenely, and took the papers. "I will make sure everything is handled exactly the way it deserves to be," I said softly. I turned around and walked out, leaving the two of them completely oblivious to the countdown that had just begun. To understand why that boardroom betrayal cut so deeply, you have to understand what I gave up to build Albright Logistics. 9 years ago, when I first walked through the front doors, this firm was not an industry leader. It was a struggling, chaotic mid-tier regional carrier operating out of a cramped, poorly ventilated office in the industrial district. The servers failed weekly. The routing schedules were done on messy spreadsheets, and the company was on the verge of losing its operational line of credit. Charles was desperate. He recognized my talent for logistical architecture and promised me the world. He looked me dead in the eyes back then and told me that if I stayed, if I sacrificed, we would build a massive logistics empire together, and my equity-backed partnership would secure my financial freedom forever. And so I bought into the corporate myth. I poured every ounce of my health and sanity into those crumbling foundations. I became the ultimate company asset, routinely working 80-hour weeks. When my sister Helen got married, I was stuck in the office resolving a midnight customs crisis at the port of Rotterdam, watching her walk down the aisle through a grainy, laggy video call on my laptop. 2 years later, I sat at an airport boarding gate watching my flight leave for a vacation I had not taken in 4 years. Because Charles had called me in tears, pleading that a major shipment block would ruin us if I did not come back to the office immediately. But the absolute heaviest toll, the one that still makes my throat tighten, was what happened during the final years of my mother's life. When she was diagnosed with a terminal illness, I did not take an extended leave of absence. I could not. Charles constantly reminded me that the company's survival rested entirely on my shoulders. So, instead of sitting by her bedside, holding her hand, I spent those precious final months sitting in the cold fluorescent light of hospital oncology ward waiting rooms, hunched over my laptop, answering frantic international shipping calls and managing supply chain emergencies. I convinced myself that the financial reward of the promised partnership would allow me to take care of my family permanently. I normalized the toxic environment because I believed in the absolute lie of corporate meritocracy. I thought that if you made yourself completely indispensable, the company would protect you from political backstabbing. For years, I quietly took on the workloads of 3 separate departments, waiting for my dedication to be recognized. That boardroom meeting showed me how foolish I had been. I was just an engine to them, meant to stay hidden in the dark, but they forgot that engines can also be turned off. That Monday evening, after the boardroom humiliation, I sat alone in my dark living room. The silence of my house was a stark contrast to the chaotic noise in my head. I walked over to my filing cabinet and pulled out a dusty folder containing my original, unamended employment contract from 9 years ago. I sat down at my desk and began to read every single line, every clause, and every piece of fine print with meticulous attention to detail. I was not looking for a way to patch things up with Charles. I was looking for their vulnerability. That was when I saw it. Tucked away under Section 12, Paragraph 4, was a massive, glaring legal loophole that the company's legal team had completely forgotten existed. A slow smile spread across my face as I realized the immense power that had just shifted into my hands. What Charles and his son failed to realize in their profound arrogance was that Albright Logistics did not actually own the operational brain of their company. I did, to the board of directors in the outside world. Our massive competitive edge was just a black box that magically worked. In reality, that black box was a proprietary, highly complex dynamic routing software system called Aegis Route. I spent 5 grueling years single-handedly designing, coding, and perfecting it. The software integrated real-time maritime freight schedules, historical customs clearing speeds, and live port congestion data from every major harbor in the world. It allowed our fleet to bypass global shipping bottlenecks and guarantee delivery times 30% faster than any competitor in the Western Hemisphere. It was the sole reason we won every major government and enterprise contract. But here was the catch, and it was a catastrophic one for the Albright family legacy. Because Charles had chronically underfunded our internal IT department for years to maximize his own personal dividends, our corporate servers could not handle the massive processing power required to run the Aegis route algorithms. To keep the company from crashing, I had hosted the primary operational overrides, custom API integrations, and system recovery protocols on a highly secure private cloud server. I legally registered that server and the software code under my own name as my personal intellectual property, protected under federal copyright laws. I had merely leased its operational use to Albright Logistics for $0 under a verbal handshake agreement with Charles years ago, back when I still foolishly believed he had my back. They assumed it was company property because it was accessed from my office computer. But the actual engine was hosted on a digital territory they did not have a single legal right to touch. That was not my only layer of insulation. Beyond the technology, I held absolute personal control over the company's 3 largest legacy accounts: Bancroft Pharmaceuticals, Sentinel Heavy Industries, and Summit Enterprises. Combined, these 3 corporate giants represented a staggering 72% of Albright Logistics' total annual revenue. The executives of these mega-corporations did not trust Charles, and they certainly did not know who Julian was. They trusted me explicitly. I was the one who personally answered their calls at 2 in the morning when a hurricane threatened their supply chains. I was the one who navigated foreign customs blockades to save their operations from grinding to a halt. What Charles completely forgot in his haste to hand his son a crown was a specific buried legal safeguard inside the master service agreements of those 3 clients. Years ago, during intense contract renewals, the legal teams for Bancroft, Sentinel, and Summit insisted on inserting a strict key person protection clause. It explicitly dictated that if I, Edward Foster, was no longer personally overseeing their global supply infrastructure, the clients had the immediate, unilateral right to convert their rigid 5-year contracts into unstable month-to-month agreements with an immediate 30-day exit option. The entire multi-million-dollar valuation of Albright Logistics was built entirely on a house of cards, and I was the only pillar holding it up. I kept this information completely to myself over the next few days. I quietly executed my daily tasks, watching Julian run around the executive floor, redecorating his new office with expensive furniture paid for by the company. He spent his days taking phone calls from interior designers, while I continued to manage the flow of hundreds of freight vessels across the ocean. I was waiting for the perfect moment to step out from under the hood. The first warning sign arrived on a Sunday night. I was sitting at home, reading a book, when my personal laptop flashed with an automated security system alert. Julian had just logged into the master dashboard from his home computer and was actively attempting to alter the core algorithmic routing codes without my authorization. He had found the settings menu and was trying to adjust the priority flags for our shipping lanes. He was trying to play CEO with a system he did not comprehend, and that was his very first fatal mistake. I watched the logs on my screen as he clicked through menus, completely unaware that he was triggering silent security flags. I did not block his attempts, nor did I correct them. I simply downloaded the security logs, documenting his unauthorized access. He was already building the trap that he would eventually walk into. By Friday morning, the tension on the operations floor was palpable. Julian had begun issuing contradictory orders to our port managers, bypassing the automated schedules generated by Aegis Route. He wanted to show everyone that he was hands-on, but his interventions were already causing minor delays. Ships were sitting at anchor longer than necessary, and port fees were beginning to tick upward. I watched it all unfold from my office, keeping my logs updated. I knew the breaking point was coming. Julian's arrogance would not allow him to sit back and let the system run itself. He needed a crisis to prove his authority, and his ignorance was about to give him exactly what he wanted. The situation escalated to a crisis point exactly 2 weeks after the boardroom announcement. Julian, desperate to make a grand statement and prove his authority to the board, called an emergency global operations meeting. He demanded the presence of every director, manager, and logistics coordinator in the building. When we arrived, the whiteboard was covered in corporate buzzwords like fiscal optimization and synergistic cost reduction. Julian took the floor holding an expensive designer coffee and proudly announced a sweeping new cost-cutting initiative that he had drafted entirely by himself. His brilliant plan was to immediately cancel our premium, high-priority customs clearing contracts at the Port of Los Angeles and reroute a massive time-sensitive shipment of temperature-controlled medical supplies for Bancroft Pharmaceuticals through a cheaper, notoriously slow secondary port further down the coast. The move would supposedly save the company $80,000 in port fees. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I stood up immediately, opening my tablet to display the live maritime data. "Julian, you cannot do that," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and professional. "The secondary port is currently experiencing a historic labor strike and a massive container backlog. If you reroute that specific Bancroft Pharmaceutical shipment, the vessels will be caught in gridlock for weeks. The temperature-controlled containers will lose power. The strict refrigeration window will be violated, and $40 million worth of life-saving medical supplies will completely spoil on the tarmac. It will ruin our relationship with our biggest client." Julian did not look at the data. Instead, he laughed out loud, looking around the room to encourage the other managers to join in. No one did. They just stared at their desks in terror. "Edward, your old-school, paranoid methods are exactly why you stayed a director for 9 years. While I made executive in a matter of weeks," Julian mocked openly, his voice dripping with venom. "Technology moves faster than you do. The decision is made. Either step in line or step out of the way." I looked over at Charles, expecting him to step in and save his company from a catastrophic blunder. But Charles just sat at the head of the table, avoiding my gaze, slowly nodding his approval to his son. He was willing to risk a $40 million account just to protect his son's fragile ego, to completely seal his own fate. Julian was not finished. He leaned over the table, looking at me with a cruel smirk. Because of your blatant insubordination today, I am officially stripping you of your master system administrator credentials for the routing platform. Effective immediately, your access is restricted to a basic view-only account. Oh, and one more thing. Your quarterly performance bonus for this peak season is being entirely revoked. We are redirecting those funds to cover the transition costs of hiring my new personal social media and branding team. We need to modernize our image, and frankly, Edward, you are just overhead now. The room went dead silent. The blatant financial theft of my earned compensation, combined with the absolute public disrespect, was the final straw. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I just closed my tablet, looked Julian dead in the eyes, and gave him a slight nod. I sat quietly through the rest of the meeting, watching Charles smile proudly at his son's ruthless management style. The absolute lack of ethical boundaries in that room destroyed any remaining hesitation I had about leaving. I realized that trying to save this company from its own stupidity was a complete waste of my life. When the meeting concluded, I walked back to my office with absolute, unshakable peace. I quietly packed my small personal desk clock into my leather bag. I sat down at my terminal one last time, logged out of the company network, and reached into my pocket to pull out my personal phone. I scrolled past Charles's name, bypassed the company directory entirely, and dialed a direct private number that I had not called in years. It belonged to the one person who had been waiting for this exact phone call. The voice on the other end of the line was crisp, authoritative, and instantly recognizable. It belonged to Diana Pendleton, the CEO of Pendleton Logistics, Albright's most formidable and well-funded rival in the maritime sector. For 5 years, Diana had been trying to headhunt me, recognizing that the exponential growth of Albright Logistics was not due to Charles's leadership, but my infrastructure design. Every single year, I had politely declined her multi-million-dollar offers out of a misplaced sense of loyalty to a man I thought was my mentor. But tonight, things were entirely different. I told Diana I was ready to talk. 2 hours later, we were sitting in a private, dimly lit alcove of an upscale restaurant downtown. I did not play games or waste time with corporate pleasantries. I laid out a clean, powerful proposition. I told her I was leaving Albright Logistics, and I was prepared to join Pendleton Logistics as the senior managing partner of global infrastructure. Furthermore, I would be bringing the upgraded architecture of the Aegis Root software with me. Diana's eyes lit up with absolute triumph. She did not hesitate for a single second. She called her executive legal counsel on the spot, and before the main course was served, I had a signed executive contract in my hands. It granted me absolute operational autonomy, a massive, life-changing equity stake in the company, and a base salary that was exactly double what Charles had been paying me for nearly a decade. But I knew that securing a new position was only the first step of my strategy. To execute a flawless chess game, I had to ensure my legal shields were completely airtight. The next morning, I met with Preston Wallace, one of the top corporate employment attorneys in the state. I handed him my original employment contract and the corporate emails showing that Julian had unilaterally stripped me of my earned peak season performance bonus. Preston read through the documents, chuckled softly, and looked up at me with a confident smile. He explained that by withholding my contracted quarterly bonus, Albright Logistics had committed direct material breach of our employment agreement. In the eyes of the law, because the employer broke the contract first, the strict non-compete clause I had signed 9 years ago was instantly rendered completely null and void. Under the legal doctrine of prior material breach, the company had forfeited its right to enforce any restrictive covenants against me. I was entirely free to work for whoever I wanted, whenever I wanted. Charles and his arrogant son thought they were saving a bit of corporate overhead, but that one petty act of financial theft had just legally unlocked my chains and left them entirely defenseless. Over the weekend, the real countdown began. Sitting in the quiet comfort of my home office on Saturday night, I opened my personal laptop and logged into the secure private cloud server that hosted the core encryption keys and master operational overrides for the Aegis Root software. I did not commit any industrial sabotage. I did not delete a single company file, hack into their hardware, or destroy any corporate records. I simply went into the server settings and quietly revoked the free, unwritten operational license I had granted to Albright Logistics years ago. I set an automated termination clock on the system. The countdown was set to hit 0 on Monday morning at exactly 9 a.m. I was merely reclaiming my own personal, legally registered intellectual property. Once the system clock was locked, I opened my personal email and drafted a brief, formal, and completely emotionless resignation letter. I addressed it to both Charles and Julian. I stated that effective immediately, I was resigning from my position due to the company's material breach of contract regarding my compensation. I kept the tone entirely professional, offering no explanations, no complaints, and no goodbyes. I hit send at 11:30 p.m. on Sunday night. Then I picked up my corporate phone, powered it down completely, and placed it deep inside a desk drawer. I felt an incredible weight lift off my shoulders. I was completely at peace knowing that when the sun came up, the corporate empire that had exploited my labor for 9 years, was going to face a reality they were completely unprepared to handle. Monday morning at the Albright Logistics headquarters began like any other day, but it quickly transformed into an absolute operational apocalypse. At exactly 9 a.m., the automated system clock on my private server hit 0, and the lease on Aegis route officially expired. Instantly, across global offices stretching from New York to Rotterdam, the master logistics and scheduling dashboards went completely pitch black. The proprietary routing algorithms that managed thousands of international freight containers froze in place. Without the software's automated real-time optimization, the entire global network reverted instantly to the company's legacy manual data entry systems. These were outdated systems that the current undertrained staff had absolutely no idea how to operate. Phones across the operations floor began to ring simultaneously as a tidal wave of confusion hit the company. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the second domino fell, and it was a catastrophic blow to the company's finances. The massive, time-sensitive shipment of temperature-controlled pharmaceutical supplies for Bancroft Pharmaceuticals arrived at the secondary port that Julian had aggressively selected to save a few $1,000s. Just as I had explicitly warned, the vessel was immediately trapped in a historic, gridlocked backlog caused by the ongoing labor strike. Because the company's mass routing system was dark, the local port handlers could not coordinate emergency offloading. Within 30 minutes, the primary generator on the refrigeration container suffered a critical power failure. The strict temperature window was completely violated, and $40 million worth of life-saving medical supplies began to spoil rapidly on the hot tarmac, ruined beyond repair. Meanwhile, Julian sauntered onto the executive floor at 9:45 a.m. holding a designer latte, completely oblivious to the panic around him. He found the entire operations room in a state of absolute chaos. Alarms were blaring from the server racks, and frantic managers were shouting over phone lines to furious port authorities. When he demanded to know why the main display screens were blank, the head of the internal IT department looked at him with a face pale with terror. Julian marched over to the main terminal and tried to furiously type in his executive override credentials to bypass the blackout. But the system instantly locked her out, flashing a glaring crimson security message across every monitor in the building. Access denied. Proprietary intellectual property of Edward Foster. License expired. Julian completely lost his composure, screaming at the IT staff and demanding they hack past the lock screen. The IT director flatly informed him that it was a mathematical impossibility. Edward built the entire code infrastructure on his own private network, the IT director explained, and no one in this building possesses the encryption keys to restart the algorithms. Without Edward, we are entirely locked out of the operational brain of the business. And then came the calls that truly broke the company's back. The CEO of Bancroft Pharmaceuticals discovered the catastrophic cargo failure at the secondary port. When he called the executive office to demand answers and learned that I was no longer with the company, his fury peaked. He did not waste a single minute. He immediately called his legal team and officially triggered the key person protection clause embedded within their master service agreement, pulling their multi-million-dollar account from Albright Logistics permanently. Within the next 2 hours, as news of the system blackout and the Bancroft disaster rippled through the industry grapevine, the CEOs of Sentinel Heavy Industries and Summit Enterprises followed suit. They executed their own key person clauses, freezing all active accounts. Just like that, by 1 p.m., 72% of Albright Logistics' projected annual revenue vanished into thin air, causing the firm's private stock valuation to plummet into freefall. Charles watched in absolute horror from his glass office as his family legacy dissolved before lunch. Trembling, his face drained of all color, he pushed past his sobbing son and frantic executives, grabbed his phone, and desperately dialed my personal number. I was sitting in a sunlit, state-of-the-art corner office at Pendleton Logistics, sipping a cup of hot chamomile tea with Diana Pendleton, when my personal phone began to vibrate violently across the glass desk. Diana gestured toward it with a knowing smile. Beside us sat Preston Wallace, the elite corporate employment attorney I had retained over the weekend. I tapped the screen and placed the call on speakerphone. Charles's voice exploded through the quiet room, instantly shattering the calm atmosphere. He was not just angry, he sounded completely unhinged. "Edward, what did you do to my network?" he screamed, his breath ragged over the line. "You sabotaged our entire system. Our dashboards are black, our shipments are gridlocked, and Bancroft Pharmaceuticals is pulling their account. This is corporate sabotage, industrial theft, and a direct violation of your non-compete agreement. My legal team is drafting a lawsuit right now. We will ruin you, Edward. You will never work in this industry again if you do not turn that software back on this instant." I listened to his furious rant without a single tremor in my breathing. I looked over at Preston, who simply shook his head and gestured for me to remain silent. I did not raise my voice, I did not get defensive. I kept my tone perfectly level, cool, and detached. "Charles," I said smoothly, "I have not sabotaged a single thing. Please speak to my legal counsel, Preston Wallace. He is sitting right here with me." Preston leaned forward toward the phone, his voice dripping with professional authority. "Mr. Albright, my name is Preston Wallace, and I represent Mr. Foster. Let me clarify the legal reality of your situation so you can stop wasting your breath on empty threats. First, your company committed a material breach of contract when you unilaterally withheld Mr. Foster's earned quarterly performance bonus. Under state labor law, because the employer breached the contract first, his employment agreement, including the strict non-compete clause, was instantly rendered null and void. He is legally permitted to work for any competitor he chooses." Preston paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "Second, regarding the software infrastructure, the Aegis Route platform is legally registered under Mr. Foster's name as his exclusive personal intellectual property under Section 106 of the Copyright Act. Your firm enjoyed a free operational license based on a verbal agreement, which he has legally revoked. If your internal IT staff attempts to hack, bypass, or reverse engineer his encryption, we will file immediate federal criminal charges for intellectual property theft under Section 271 of the Patent Act. You have no legal legs to stand on, Mr. Albright." There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. The aggressive, arrogant tyrant vanished in a single second. When Charles spoke again, his voice was trembling, completely broken and desperate. The power dynamic had reversed completely. "Edward, please," Charles begged, his voice cracking with emotion. "You cannot do this to me. The company is falling apart. Bancroft has already pulled their account. Sentinel and Summit are threatening to leave by the end of the day. We are facing hundreds of millions in damages. I am sorry about the bonus. It was a mistake. I will wire your bonus to your account right now. I will give you an immediate promotion to Senior Vice President of Global Operations. I will give you a full equity partnership and a $250,000 sign-on bonus. Just please log back in and turn the routing algorithms back on." In the background, I could hear Julian sobbing frantically. "Edward, please," Julian wailed, his previous arrogance completely gone. "I did not know the system worked like that. I was just trying to do my job. Please save us. The board is going to destroy me." I listened to the man who had exploited my labor for 9 years, the man who had likened me to a hidden engine that belonged out of sight in the dark. I felt no anger, no hatred, only a deep, profound sense of closure. "Charles," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. "You told me that engines belong under the hood, where no one sees them. You forgot that without the engine, your beautiful car is just a heavy piece of metal sitting on the side of the highway. I do not work for people who only value the paint job." Without waiting for a response, I reached out and tapped the red button, completely severing the connection. I looked up at Diana, who raised her teacup in a silent toast. Turning back to my new terminal, I signed the final implementation order to launch the upgraded Aegis Route 2.0 system across Pendleton Logistics' entire global fleet. 6 months have passed since that fateful Monday morning, and the structural landscape of our entire industry has shifted permanently. Albright Logistics was never able to recover from the staggering financial blow of the Bancroft Pharmaceuticals lawsuit, combined with the immediate departure of their three largest legacy accounts. Unable to fulfill their international shipping obligations or stabilize their crashing stock price, the company formally filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy restructuring. During the liquidation process, the company's remaining regional assets were sold off to pay their massive debts. Charles was forced to sell his luxury family estate just to avoid total financial ruin and pacify his aggressive creditors. As for Julian, his brief and disastrous corporate career ended permanently before it ever truly began. They became a painful, public cautionary tale throughout the global logistics sector. Conversely, my life at Pendleton Logistics has turned into a brilliant new reality. Under my direction as senior managing partner, our firm successfully and seamlessly absorbed Bancroft Pharmaceuticals, Sentinel Heavy Industries, and Summit Enterprises. Because these legacy clients already trusted me explicitly, they transitioned their entire global supply chains to our platform without a single operational hitch. They finally received the world-class, uninterrupted service they deserved, and our market share skyrocketed overnight. My new team respects my expertise deeply, and I now manage a diverse, highly motivated department where transparent compensation, technical innovation, and operational excellence are openly recognized and rewarded. Every single one of my engineers operates with true equity stakes in the systems they build, ensuring that no one's invisible labor is ever hidden away in the dark to protect an executive's ego. The best part of this entire journey is not the prestige, the massive corner office, or the fact that my salary has doubled. It is the profound sense of dignity I feel every single morning when I walk through the doors. I no longer have to beg for validation from a toxic boss, and I never have to worry about my hard work being stolen to pad someone else's resume. I often stand by the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my new office, looking out over the bustling container port as the cargo ships move efficiently across the water, guided entirely by the upgraded algorithms of my software. Sometimes people ask me if I feel a sense of petty satisfaction watching my old company crumble into bankruptcy. I always tell them the same thing. The truth is, the best revenge was never about destroying Charles or his son. It was not about watching their empire collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. The best revenge was building a life where I am fully valued, fully seen, and completely compensated for my brilliance. If you are currently sitting at a desk feeling undervalued, overworked, and ignored by a toxic boss, let my story be your sign. You are not trapped. Your loyalty is a premium asset, and you must never give it away to people who treat you like overhead. Know your absolute worth, document your leverage, and never be afraid to walk away from a system that refuses to see your true value. Because the moment you step out from under the hood, you might just realize that you were the one driving the entire car.